Welcome to Lecture 9.3. We're going to continue talking about attachment now. So, attachment is a strong emotional connection that persists over time and across circumstances. Basic definition of attachment. The sensitive period for attachment is birth to 3. And so what's been found is that attachment between a child and his caregiver in the first 3 years of life is critical for the infant to learn how to attach to anyone later in life. And we'll look at different types of attachment. So, attachment is a skill that we all have to learn. We have to learn how to create attached relationships, and we do that the first 3 years of our life. Interestingly, an infant's ability to thrive physically and psychologically depends on the quality of attachment that's been formed with the infant's caregiver. I love this. They have done research and they found that mothers and fathers interact with their infants differently. Neither is good or bad, just different. The first 6 months of an infant's life is a lot about mom. Men tend to be a little nervous with newborns because they're just small. Newborns are small and they're kind of vulnerable. And mothers are just a little more comfortable handling infants. I think some of that is just, what's the word I'm looking for? Sexual expectations. Women are expected to do well with newborns. Men aren't. What they find is that men start spending more time with their infants when they can roughhouse with their babies. So that doesn't, roughhousing is age appropriate. But once the father or male figure can be a little more physical with the infant, they spend more time with their infant. And I think this meme does a great job of showing that. If you ever get a chance, just go to YouTube and search for fathers alone with babies. Hilarious. I love those. Okay. So, there's a great research study or experiment called The Strange Situation that psychologists use to research attachment. And, so again, we're looking at the quality of parenting between an infant and a child. It's parent, caregiver. And during those first 3 years, infants can attach to more than just one caregiver. But the hope is that the infant will attach to at least one caregiver so that they learn the skill of attachment. So there's this great experiment called the Strange Situation Test. And this test is used to assess caregiver-infant interactions and leads to the discovery of attachment patterns. And I want to be really clear, we do not use the Strange Situation Test for diagnostic purposes. So, if we have a toddler come in and something's going on psychologically, we are not going to use the Strange Situation to explore the quality of their attachment to their caregiver. This is not a diagnostic tool. This test is an experiment that we use to explore issues around attachment. Now, with the Strange Situation, we're looking at separation. So the caregiver brings the infant into the lab, and developmentalists refer to any child from birth to 3 as an infant. With the Strange Situation, we're looking at what happens when we separate the infant and its caregiver, and what happens when they come back together. What happens when they're reunited? What we're looking at is how does the infant or child cope with the distress that they feel when they're separated from their caregiver? So please go to the folder Chapter 9 Development Lecture Videos and watch these 3 videos. They're really good. Attachment Styles, The Strange Situation with Mary Ainsworth, one of the first major researchers on the issue of attachment, and The Strange Situation Experiment. Welcome back. I think those are really great videos. I've done lab research with infants, and it's so hard when they end up crying because of something happening in the experiment. And it's not always caused by the experiment. Sometimes they're just hungry. But, you know, you saw with The Strange Situation that some infants have complete meltdowns when their caregiver leaves. Some don't calm down when their parent returns, and some do. So with The Strange Situation, you have the caregiver brings their infant into the lab, and you just have a room set up with toys and, you know, just your average room for babies to play in. The first time we separate the infant and caregiver, we look to see, okay, how does the child respond? What does the child do? So a securely attached infant does get upset when their attachment figure leaves. They start to fuss, they might cry. The avoidant child isn't distressed. They aren't quite as, I was going to use the word attached, but they aren't as in sync with their caregiver in a situation, well, in the strange situation. The anxious ambivalent child has a complete meltdown when the attachment figure leaves. But the big part of the strange situation test is what happens when the caregiver returns. As you saw in the videos, those infants that were securely attached, they go right for their caregiver. They want to be swooped up, and they are quickly soothed. They seek out that comfort contact, and it calms them right down. All's good with their world, and they go back to doing what they were doing before on the floor. The avoidant child avoids the caregiver. So there was, in one of the videos, a mother picked up her child, and he had become upset, but you could see he was pushing against her chest and arching his back. He was demonstrating what avoidance is. We all do that when we want to get someone away from us. We push them. So the avoidant child actually wants to avoid the caregiver when he or she returns. The anxious ambivalent child both wants and rejects comfort contact. And they won't calm down. They just keep crying. It's really hard for them. It takes a long time for them to settle down again. And often with this strange situation, we'll have infants and their caregivers do this separation a few times. So, let's look at each type of attachment. Secure attachment occurs when parents are consistently warm, responsive, and sensitive to their infant's needs. When it comes to attachment, it's all about consistency. Can the infant predict that you are going to meet their needs, that you're going to be responsive and sensitive and warm to them? Are you going to be, just caring and friendly with them? About 65% of children are securely attached. In the strange situation, the securely attached infant does become distressed when his caregiver leaves the room, but is quickly comforted when his caregiver returns and seeks out contact, and then returns to playing once he's been calmed. Once, he's had that comfort contact and he's calmed down, it doesn't take long and he goes right back to playing. The insecure attachment, there's two forms. There's the insecure avoidant infant and the insecure anxious ambivalent child. So insecure attachment happens when an infant's parents are neglectful, inconsistent, or insensitive to their infant's moods and behaviors. I want to say this. Every parent has moments when they're just not very sensitive to their child's needs. The issue is, what is your norm? How do you usually interact with your infant? So are you regularly inconsistent? Does your child not have the ability to predict if you're going to be warm or if you're going to be cold? Are they unable to can they predict your sensitivity and warmth? And neglectful, that's a loaded word. I'm not talking about neglectful on the level of child abuse, but with some parents, with their infants, when they're not securely attaching, because the parent's having a hard time being consistent and warm, neglectful is more just kind of ignoring the child unless the child is really demanding attention. So, insecure avoidant infants are 20 to 25% of infants, and insecure anxious ambivalent are 10 to 15%. So the avoidant infant is an infant who is avoidant. An infant who is avoidant has learned that her caregiver will not be sensitive to her needs. In the strange situation, the insecure avoidant infant doesn't get upset when her caregiver leaves the room and just keeps playing. If the infant does become distressed, because sometimes they will, but typically in the strange situation, insecure avoidant infants don't get distressed, or if they do, it's just a little bit. In the strange situation, the insecure avoidant infant will allow a stranger to comfort her. The securely attached infant will not allow a stranger to comfort her. The insecure avoidant infant will allow a stranger to comfort her. And when the caregiver returns to the room, the infant ignores her caregiver. So it's a very different reaction than what we see in the securely attached infant. The insecure, anxious, ambivalent infant is an infant that has learned that his caregivers will not be sensitive to his needs, and they might actually be slightly fearful of their caregiver. Their caregiver is just too unpredictable, and they sometimes develop a fear of their caregiver, and for good reason. Sometimes some parents just don't have the ability to be patient with babies. So in the strange situation, the anxious, ambivalent infant has a complete meltdown when his caregiver leaves the room, becomes inconsolable. When the caregiver returns, that infant is very resistant to his caregiver's attempts to soothe him, even if he went right to his caregiver when she walked in the room. So, the baby might just be having a complete meltdown, sees the caregiver come back in the room, crawls really fast over, but then pushes against the caregiver and arches their back once they're held in the caregiver's arms. So those are the behaviors we see with the anxious, ambivalently attached infant. Okay, next lecture.